morning, everybody. We're going to start a new series today, and it is going to be a study on the 12 disciples. But we're going to lay a little bit of foundation first today, and we're going to look at the number 12 because it has a lot of significance in the Bible and well documented as well. The number 12 occurs 187 times in the Bible. It is the number of totality, completion, and perfection. So when Jesus chose 12 to have 12 disciples, sometimes they're called apostles, but they were the initial 12 disciples in the New Testament. And if you turn over with me to Revelation chapter 21, there's also the number 12 has historic meaning in heaven. Revelation 21:12. And had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates. At the gates there were 12 angels. And the names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north gate, and on the south gates, and the one west 3 gate. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So the pearly gates, the 12 gates of heaven that are made of pearl, they're guarded by 12 angels. And on those gates are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And we talked about that some time back, but it's important to still review today. And the names of the 12 apostles are on there as well. In the Jewish religion, the number 12 is also significant because when a child becomes 12, boy or girl, from their birth date, when they turn 12, to the Shabbat before they turn 13, they must have a ceremony. For a girl, it's called a bat mitzvah, B-A-T. And for a boy, it's called a bar mitzvah, B-A-R. Now, in Jewish custom, when a child is 12, they are known to be the age of accountability. From that point on, a child is considered an adult. They can make their own decisions. They can be held accountable as an adult. Now, in that Shabbat, before the boy has his 13th birthday, in the synagogue, he goes in and he reads in front of the congregation from the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. He reads it in Hebrew. So before he does all this, he must learn Hebrew. She learns Hebrew too, but the custom is not for her to read the Torah in front of the synagogue. So it's not just by happenstance that the number 12 has been the number selected. It's biblical. It's the Jewish law. It's how it is. So unless some emergent thing happens before a boy or girl, the Shabbat before they turn or have their 13th birthday, they must have these ceremonies. Now, if you remember, when Joseph and Mary came to Jerusalem and they made the pilgrimage, they had done their stuff in Jerusalem, they had paid their taxes, they had visited all that they wanted to visit, and they left. Well, it must have been a pretty big group of people, because it took them 3 days before they realized Jesus was missing. And the significance of this time is because Jesus was 12. When they went back, he was in the temple with the scribes, priests, and Pharisees. And when they came up on him, they were kind of correcting him, saying, why did you not come with us? Why did you, And he said, now you have to remember, he's 12. He's talking to his birth mother and his stepfather saying, he kind of scolds them. I'm about my Father's business. Now, can you imagine a 12-year-old? I'm telling you, a 12-year-old said that to me. I'd probably take their last name from them. But it was customary in those days that a 12-year-old was the age of accountability. Not only that, but he had the spirit of his Father, his heavenly Father, and he knew the difference between right and wrong. And he was at that age of accountability. So the number 12, although in our custom, 12 months, all that is a year, it isn't as much meaning as it was in Jewish customs back then. Jacob had 12 sons, and that was not by happenstance. God knew the lineage of the Jewish people had to come down through Abraham. And it couldn't come through Esau. So even though Jacob stole Esau's birthright because he was the twin that was born first, God still had a plan. And even though Jacob, his name means supplanter, fooler, liar, that's what his name means. When he wrestled with the angel, and he did all that he did during that time, God changed his name to Israel. And God did that purposefully. And we can look at the number 12, and the book of Revelation, it talks about what's going to happen in the end. How Jesus is going to come back and he is going to have victory over the ruler of this world, the devil, Satan. But just in the book of Revelation, the number 12 comes up 22 times. Again, we know this because in Revelation 7, it talks about the 12 tribes of Israel. And what it talks about in Revelation 7 is that there will be 12,000 from each tribe saved. Now, if you do 12,000 times 12, that's where some of these religions come up that says there's going to be 144,000 people. That's all that's going to be saved, go to heaven, raptured. But we know that's not true. If you look in Revelation 21:16, it talks about how the walls of the New Jerusalem, it will measure 144 cubits high, which is a multiple of 12. So it's going to be, the New Jerusalem is going to have walls all around it. And remember when we talked a few weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, I can't remember now, but we talked about how our God, when he's unconquerable. And when you look for a fortress, you look for something that's placed a high ground. It has a 360 purview of everything that's going on. Well, our New Jerusalem will have the same. It's going to be a fortress. And when you look at that, it's pretty amazing. Again, God has made sure it's the number of perfection. That the number 12 in the Bible is its totality, perfection, and completion. Now, if you go to Revelation 21:19 and 20, Revelation 21:19 and 20. And the foundations of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second was sapphire, the third was chalcedony, the fourth was emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh crystallis, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, I don't know, and jacinth and amethyst was the 12th. So there's precious stones there as well. These 12 gates are already made of pearl. Several gate was of one pearl. The street are pure gold, and they look like transparent glass. Now, also, when you look at the number 12, if he's putting the number 12 in the foundation of the gates of heaven with those 12 apostle names in it, the 12 apostles must be pretty significant. They must play a big role in what's happening in heaven and what's happening here on earth. And remember, the 12 foundation stones that were in the city, all of them had the 12 disciples or apostles' names. The high priests in heaven, or in the temple, their breastplates. And you remember, we talked a couple weeks ago about giving honor where honor is due, and obeying the laws of the land, because no person put in a governmental leadership role did it without God knowing. That means he put them there. He put them there for a reason, although we might not have any idea why. He does. So when we look at that, we remember that Apostle Paul, when he went to the king And there was a man there, and he kind of mouthed off to this man because the man was just in a regular robe. But Paul later found out that that man was high priest. And he went back and apologized, because even though he may not have agreed with what they were saying to him, because remember, Paul, he was a Roman, and he did not believe as the Jewish people did. He believed in Christianity. That's what he believed in. So he didn't believe in all these strict Jewish laws. You can't do this, you can't do that. He believed in a spiritual salvation, that Jesus lived inside of us. But again, the costumes of the day were important. Just like I think our pastor has talked many times, a policeman standing out here with no badge, no signage, no nothing, that's not what gives him his authority. What gives him his authority is the position he holds in that government to provide peace to the community. So the badge, the thing on his shirt, it gives him authority to fulfill the laws that we have put in place. It's the same in Jewish custom back then when they had a costume. So you knew who people were by what they wore. So these high priests, you knew they were important. And you know, when back to when Jesus was in the temple, in the synagogue in Jerusalem, you know, they had traveled from Nazareth. And if you think about Jerusalem, if you think about one of our metropolitan cities, LA, Miami, New York, Chicago, you know, Houston, these big cities, when you think about them, that's what it likened to them going to Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem was where the high court was. It was where the high priest was. So if there was a situation, guess where you had to go? You had to go to Jerusalem, because you had to be heard by one of those two people, either the high priest group or the high court group. So being in Jerusalem was significant, and him being there was also significant, because remember, he was a carpenter's son by trade. He's already 12. I would imagine that he is already working in his father's shop, because they had to learn a trade by their father. Now, they weren't wealthy people, so he was going to learn from his father and that. And we know that Jesus had several brothers and sisters, Jesus being the oldest, obviously, and they were significant in his life as well. So let's go to Luke chapter 2. Luke 2:42. And as we're turning over there, you know, most of the 12 were fishermen or farmers. There was only one that wasn't. Luke 2:42. And when he was 12 years old, they went to Jerusalem, and after the custom of the feast, and when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and Mary knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinfolks and acquaintances. So this is a whole group of people traveling back to Nazareth And when they found him not, they turned back against to Jerusalem, seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding of the answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou dealt with us? Because thy father and I have sought thee sorrowingly. They thought he was lost. And he said unto them, How is it that you sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Now that's written in red, so that's what Jesus said. And they understood not that saying which he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. So now she understands, Mary's getting an understanding of what Jesus' life is going to be like. Even though he's just 12, now he's at the age of accountability. Now he's sitting at the feet of priests and doctors and understanding what they're saying. And then when he says that he is going to be about his Father's business, she starts understanding that her baby has a bigger purpose. Now, Gabriel came to her. She already knew that he was going to be the Messiah. But I don't think until right about now she realized what that could have meant. So it would have to be very concerning for a mother or parent. Now, moving on from that, in the Old Testament, there were 12 minor prophets in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, there are 12 books of history. And I'm going to tell you which ones those are. The 12 books of history in the Bible are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. I'm going to go over those one more time. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Now those are important because it lays out the history. So if you're wanting to, and sometimes we forget that this is the best history book ever written. The first history book ever written. So preachers really, and teachers, and apostles, prophets, and evangelists, and all of us should really read this to understand the history of Christianity, the history of Jesus, what all happened, and why is it significant. And remember, when Jesus picked the 12, when he picked the 12, he was 30. Because they were only with Jesus 3.5 years. So in 3.5 years, the disciples, good morning, ladies. the disciples, they had to be taught and learn all the ways of Jesus, because the whole goal of the disciples were, if you notice, he sent them out to different places. Most of the disciples, like I said, were fishermen or farmers, except for Matthew. Matthew was an educated man, and he was one of the only ones, it said he was the first one to pen Jesus' history. Now, Matthew, he wasn't popular, just so you know, because the tax collector was just about as unpopular as you could be in the Jewish customs. Because remember, in Leviticus, it tells us the Jewish law. You are supposed to tithe your money to the temple. And now the kings are saying, no, you do that and you pay taxes to the government. So needless to say, Matthew was not a popular fellow. But he did write the book of Matthew. And he was one of the ones that were educated enough that he could scribe and write. One of the things in Leviticus 24:5, you can write it down, I'm not going to go there, but it tells us that there were 12 loaves of bread permanently offered on the golden table. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 23, remember when Moses came to the promised land and he sent some spies over there to look, and they come back and said, oh, the grapes you have to have 2 men to carry the grapes. Well, it was 12 spies that he sent. 12. Not 11, not 10, but 12. In 1 Kings 4:7, and remember, Solomon was a mighty man of God. It says in 1 Kings 4:7, Solomon had 12 administrators. In Joshua chapter 4, verse 3, it says, 12 men laid 12 stones in building the monument to the Lord. In the books of Chronicles, it tells us about 12 great priests. Now remember, in Deuteronomy, Pastor taught on this a few weeks back, there is the law of the blessing and the law of the curses. And in Deuteronomy 27 is where the curses are. Deuteronomy 28 is where the blessings are. The curses, there's 12 of them. In Numbers chapter 7, verse 29, God identifies, or he told Moses that there were 12 animals that could be sacrificed. Only those 12, not anything random out of these 12. And remember when Jesus went to the temple and overthrew the money changers? And remember, in Jerusalem, all these different places had different coins. Like if you go to Europe, you got to get French francs and, all these. Well, the money changers were there to convert whatever coin you had into the Hebrew coin of Jerusalem of the day. And the reason they did that is because according to the sin that you did, these 12 sacrificial animals were there, and you purchased them from the temple because you had traveled all these ways, and you could not, you didn't go out in your field and get a lamb and bring it in for 7 days and all of that. So that's why he overturned the money change, because they were skimming money from the people. And Jesus did not like that, because all the people are his people. So when you look at those 12 animals, I don't know how they were lined up. I'm sure it says somewhere, but according to your infraction, sin, they would know which one you needed to sacrifice. Now, the word apostle, it means emissary, missionary. The 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles that were sent out, all when they were in the land of Egypt, and Moses went up on the mountain, talked to God, and he got exactly how the Holy of Holies was supposed to be constructed. He came down and he laid out how the 12 tribes, and remember when I taught about the 12 tribes, their placement according to where the Holy of Holies were was significant. Remember, the Levites are the priests, so they were the closest ones, because the priests are the ones that would have to go into the Holy of Holies, pour the blood on the mercy seat, so they stayed closest. And every tribe had significance about where they were. And every time they moved in the land of Egypt, when 430 years that they were there, remember they was only supposed to be there 400, but because Moses was disobedient, they got another 30 years added on. So it was actually 430 years that they had to be in there. So every time they uprooted their settlement and moved it, the same exact locations were put out, because that is what God had told Moses. Now, one of the reasons Jesus chose the 12, it wasn't anything significant about each of them. If you remember, when John the Baptist baptized Jesus, he didn't have the 12 yet. He baptized Jesus. Andrew was there, and he witnessed the baptism. Andrew is Peter's brother. Now, Andrew and Peter, they were probably the most wealthy of the 12, because their father had a large fishing business. It says in the word also, he had servants. And Andrew goes back and he tells his brother Peter about this man named Jesus. Because after he was baptized, he heard him preach. He heard him teach. He saw some of the things that he was able to do. And in this day and time, nothing like that had happened. It was like if you had a great healing minister that did all these miracles, and you heard about it, and then you went and seen it for yourself. That's what it was like. So he goes and gets Peter, and Peter comes back. Now, when Peter comes back, if you look in the study of the 12, Jesus renames some of them. Like Peter didn't go by Peter. Peter went by Simon. Well, I guess Jesus decided he was going to name him, and he names him Cephas. So anytime you hear Simon, Peter, or Cephas, it's Peter, like Peter, James, and John, Peter. The other thing to note here is there were two men that Jesus called the sons of thunder. And remember, Peter, he's got a little fiery temper. You know, he's kind of, so does Andrew. Kind of got to get that in check. Remember, he cut the guy's ear off, and Jesus said, lay down your sword when he's in the garden. Well, there's two more guys named James the Greater. And when you see James the Greater or James the Lesser or any two names and they say the greater or the lesser, it means the older or the younger. So this is James the Greater, because there's another James. The two sons of thunder are James and his brother John, and it's James the Greater. And they are Jesus's cousins, but they're also his disciples. They are from Mary's sister, Salome, and their father is Zebedee. So Jesus, when you think about it, Jesus really kept some of his 12 very close. It was people he trusted. And remember the three that always went a little further. You know, when the 12 went the night before Jesus was crucified, the 12 went. Some remained, but Peter, James, and John went on in. And Jesus said to them, "Will you pray with me?" And unfortunately, he looks up and they're sleeping under a tree. But he keeps praying. But he did keep some of those in the 12 very close to him. And they had a different kind of relationship. Those three had a different kind of relationship than the other 9. And when you look at Peter and James and John were the closest. And if you remember from your Sunday school days, that when Jesus was crucified, he looked at John and said, "Mother, son, son, mother." And even when John was banished to the island of Patmos, guess who he took with him? Mary. He took Mary because he thought of her. After that, he was completely responsible for her, whatever she needed. So if he was banished, he couldn't leave her back. He wasn't going to just leave her in Greece. Well, I'll be back whenever I'm not banished anymore, because he didn't know how long he was going to be banished or if he even would be back. And he didn't. He died there. So I'm going to just give you just some brief characteristics. And next week, we're going to go in detail about each apostle, where they're from, what kind of personalities they have, what they did. But remember this, that when Jesus, and he sent them out everywhere. Because remember, This is on the land that they knew existed at the time. So they went to Syria, Rome, Greece. They went to today's Turkey. You know, Ephesus, the church of Ephesus, Turkey. That's where it's at. So it was land that they needed to get to speak and talk about Jesus and the Messiah, and that there's everlasting life, and that his blood covers everything, which was a big deal. But Paul, Apostle Paul, you know, he was Roman. He killed Christians. But on the road to Damascus, he has an encounter with God. He struck him blind. Because I would imagine Paul, if he's high up in the Roman army, and it sounds like Paul had a mind like me, kind of, a mind of my own. Yeah, you give me the list of rules, I'll probably follow them, but if I can come up with something better, that's what we're going to follow. And I think Paul was a lot like that. He was a leader, but just like when Jacob fought with that angel all night long and wouldn't let him go until he blessed him, he was fighting with God. Well, the same thing happened to Paul on that road. He had an encounter and got to know Jesus and was saved, and he wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He was ordained to become Paul, not Saul of Tarsus, but Paul. And he was a mighty man of God, and he did major things in the Bible. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about who replaced Judas. Matthias replaced Judas, but I want to talk about Matthias more in detail. So we'll do that next week. So just look at that. Think about what we talked about today, because the disciples, you think about how long it takes to get a college degree today. 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. These disciples had 3.5 years to learn everything they needed to learn so that they could go on and do their Father's business. They could preach, teach. And remember, I think it was 35 miracles Jesus did during that 3.5 years. So think about all of that, and think about how young a 12-year-old is, and him sitting there with the priests and doctors in the temple. His parents have been gone for 3 days, and when they come to look for him, he kind of chastises them and says, "You have to know, I am here about my Father's business," because he knew what his destiny was at 12 years old. Have a good week. God bless you. We'll see you next week.